For this year's tyre reviews winter tyre test, I've once again rounded up 10 of the best winter tyres I can find, but this year 5 of them are brand new tyres. How exciting! On test we have the Bridgestone Blizzak LM005, the new Continental WinterContact TS870, the new Goodyear Ultragrip Performance 3, the new Hankook Cept RS3, the Kleber Krisalp HP3, the Michelin Alpin 6, the Petlas snowmaster, the new Pirelli Cinturato Winter 2, the new Semperit Speedgrip 5 and the Vredestein Wintrac Pro. Can any of the new tyres really move the game on, or will one of the established tyres remain dominant? Let's go find out. Snow handling, and I think if you're a tyre geek like me, you're going to enjoy this because the results are very interesting. Firstly, as a bit of a preface, this snow handling track is a very long track. It's a 2-minute lap, so while you might see a larger difference in times than you're used to seeing, in percentage terms, all the tyres are within just over 5%, and you can find the percentages on tyreReviews.com as always, as with all the information. As I've said, none of these tyres were bad, but one has to be the slowest, and that was the Vredestein, 5.2% off the best. Now, the Vredestein was a complete joy to drive subjectively. You could just slide the car around, you could drift it, it was predictable, it was gradual, everything you want from a winter tyre. It just didn't quite have the grip of the best, which was a shame. The Wintrac Pro is getting on a bit. Perhaps it's time for an upgrade. I'm sure Apollo Vredestein are working on the next best thing, and I'm sure it'll be amazing. The next group of tyres, all less than 4% off the best, and this will surprise you if you're into winter tyres or tyre testing, was Semperit, Continental and Bridgestone. The TS870 and the LM005 not at the front of a winter tyre test. This just goes to show what progress has been made, because a lot of the tyres ahead of it are new tyres. We'll get to them in a bit. Of the three, the Bridgestone was probably the most rounded, the easiest to drive, but they were all very, very close. The Continental was very nice, just a tiny bit of understeer, and the Semperit, just a nice rounded tyre. The Michelin Alpin 6 and the Goodyear Ultragrip Performance 3, which is a new tyre, were less than 3% off the best. Now, both very nice to drive. I think the Goodyear in this car, my driving style, just picked up a little bit too much understeer to really help it round the lap. Perhaps it will do better in traction and braking. We'll find out in a minute because I haven't actually done the testing yet. The new Pirelli Cinturato Winter 2 was 4th, just 2.3% off the best, and like the Vredestein, another tyre that was completely lovely to drive quickly. It allowed just a bit of predictable, graceful oversteer to really help you around the lap, which is very good for times. And in 3rd place was the new Hankook Cept RS3. Now, this tyre was just 1.2% off the best and had buckets of grip. It was a really exceptional tyre. And you know what? I know I'm probably saying this early because I haven't done dry and wet yet, so I might take it back. Pretty much all new Hankook tyres, like, they're knocking it out of the park. Exceptional tyre by Hankook, really enjoyed driving it. I think of the bunch, it was my favourite to drive subjectively from an everything perspective, not just from a lap time perspective, but from like what my dad would appreciate in a tyre perspective as well. In 2nd place, and not a surprise and not a new tyre, is the Kleber Krisalp HP3. Oh, I'm really sorry, HP3. Now, if you've been watching tyre tests the past year, you'll know that this tyre is often one of the best in the snow. It might not be the newest tyre, it might not be a premium tyre, it might be a sub-brand of Michelin, but it is very, very good in the snow. And in 1st place, which might come as a bit of a surprise to you. You know what, if I'm being honest, because I test blind, I didn't know what I was testing, I've just got set numbers. And when I was getting all the results put together with the actual tyre at the end, I was like, huh, that finish there was the cheapest tyre on test, the Petlas. This tyre was exceptional. It was one of my favourites subjectively. If I was to critique it, the grip was a tiny bit peaky, so as you started sliding, it was a little bit quicker than the rest, but that is often the case with high levels of grip. Now, you might be confused, you might be thinking, Jonathan, you've spent the last 7-8 years of your life telling me not to buy a cheap tyre, not to buy a budget tyre, because they're not very good. I stand by that because what I'm telling you is based on the data I'm testing. I'm not saying every budget tyre in the world is bad, because I've not tested every budget tyre in the world. But also, especially with winter tyres, it is entirely possible that Petlas have put all their eggs in the snow basket, and when we get this in the dry and wet, it might be a complete and total disaster. But on snow handling, the Petlas budget cheap tyre has won the test on merit. It was the best both times I did snow handling, and it was one of my favourites subjectively. So, interesting. Let's go find out if that's repeatable in traction and braking. The Petlas couldn't quite match the Bridgestone, Kleber or Continental in snow braking. Snow traction results can be found on the link in the description. Wet handling. Now, as always, I test blind, but it didn't require a genius to work out which the Petlas was. The thing just oversteered, understeered, sideways steered, upside down steered. It was, I can't describe how difficult it was to drive. It was one of the most unpleasant experiences I've had driving a winter tyre in a long time, and was the only tyre I quit out. We do 4 laps and we averaged them out to get the time. I quit out after 2, though the 2 laps were exactly the same time, because I genuinely thought I damaged the car. Just cheap tyres in the wet, it's difficult. The thing was exceptional in the snow, but in this group of tyres in the wet, yikes. Next up were Kleber and Semperit, way ahead of the budget winter tyre, but still 5 seconds off the best. Both were fine. They just had a tiny amount of oversteer in the balance, nothing dramatic, but just obviously didn't have the grip of the best. Michelin Alpin 6 finished 7th. This tyre, this seems to be a running trend with Michelin in the wet. The Michelin Alpin 6 had the safest balance, much like the Cross Climate 2 did in the all-season test. It was a lovely, safe understeer balance, but that understeer balance meant you couldn't quite extract a lap time, because mid-corner you were fighting understeer and then you were waiting to accelerate, and if you're not accelerating, you're losing time. So that's where it lost out, but subjectively it was a very good tyre. Pirelli and Vredestein were essentially tied for 5th. And both of these tyres, one of my favourite tyres to drive. They felt sporty for a winter tyre. So it's not an ultra-high performance winter tyre. They were good tyres to drive, like enjoyable tyres. If you're looking for an enjoyable tyre and wet handling, they're the tyres to buy. But they couldn't quite match the lap time at the very best. By the smallest margins ahead was the Hankook and the Goodyear. Now, like the Michelin, both these tyres seem to lose a little bit of time mid-corner and corner exit, because you were fighting understeer a little bit more, which is a safe balance for the road. Both had excellent levels of grip for a winter tyre. We're so close to the front now. This group is so stacked. Smallest differences make a difference in the overall order. This just leaves Continental and Bridgestone, and if you know much about winter tyres in this segment, you're not going to be shocked. The Continental was 2nd. It was a tyre that rewarded being a little bit more delicate with the actions, but like some of the previous others, had a lovely sort of safe understeery balance. Not sporty, but incredible grip. And Bridgestone are back at the top with the LM005, the Blizzak LM005. This tyre is consistently the very best winter tyre in the wet, and once again it proves to be. I knew it when I was driving it. I was like, this is the Bridgestone. This just feels, although the difference in time is small, it is noticeable as a test driver, and you can just feel Bridgestone are doing something different to everyone else with their winter tyre, and it's so impressive in the wet. So great job, Bridgestone. Bridgestone continued to lead in the wet, with Continental and Hankook close behind. The budget Petlas stopped the vehicle over 12 metres longer from just 80 kilometres an hour. Kleber, Continental and Hankook were the best in the straight aquaplaning test, and you can see the results of curved aquaplaning on the link in the description. This is what I learned during dry handling. I learned that these are all 17-inch non-performance winter tyres, and they felt like that. If you want a winter tyre that has some sort of handling, buy an all-season tyre. There's a video on the channel that I shot at exactly the same time, tested in the same conditions and the same size using the same vehicle, to show you that an all-season tyre does have a slight handling advantage in the dry, and you'll be able to look at the differences between the two. And there will be an in-depth video going into this twin test in the future, maybe in a couple of weeks, so subscribe for that. But if you insist on having a 17-inch winter tyre that has some sort of sporty behaviour, I would suggest looking at the Pirelli more, because I think that probably had the most dynamic handling. But jokes aside, all of them were surprisingly good, considering this dry handling track especially, which is very fast and very long corners, is so far out of their design parameters. I don't know what I was expecting. They're all winter tyres, so let's move on to the conclusion. As usual, I've put the rolling resistance of the tyres on the screen. Ignoring the rather random Petlas budget tyre, which for some reason had a massive advantage, the Bridgestone was the best of the main group, with the Semperit, Goodyear and Continental also impressive. You may have noticed I haven't mentioned the dry braking of the tyres. That's because for the first time in my testing history, I had issues with GPS drift on the data logger, meaning my results weren't as accurate as I need them to be. By the time I'd noticed these issues, the tyres had run a lot more testing, and while I did have dry braking reran, the data isn't as representative as I'd like due to the extreme wear on the tyres at the time of the dry braking results were generated. I toyed with the idea of just dropping dry braking from the overall results, but when I actually went through the data, it didn't actually change the overall results, so I've left it in, but just keep that in mind when you're looking at the results. The overall score weighting is exactly the same as last year's winter tyre test, and new to this year, you can head over to the Tyre Reviews website, which is linked in the description below, and adjust the score weighting to your own driving preferences, which is awesome because it means it gets the best tyre for you, not the one I'm telling you, because I don't drive like you do. I highly recommended you go over to the Tyre Reviews website and try this out yourself. One final note, to avoid market confusion, I'm not including the new Goodyear Ultragrip Performance 3 in the overall results, although you have heard about it up until this point. This is due to Goodyear's decision to postpone the launch of the new tyre from 2022 to next year 2023. I'm sure I'll have this tyre in next year's winter test as well, so I'll just talk about it more then. In last place is the Petlas Snowmaster W651. The name really isn't a lie. It really is a Snowmaster and has a very, very, very low rolling resistance. However, if you want a tyre to work in conditions other than snow, this is certainly one to avoid. Its real weakness was the wet, which we see so often in cheap tyres, where it was over 30% worse than the best in wet braking and a complete handful in wet handling. In fact, it's one of the worst tyres I've driven in wet handling in a year. Please don't fit this tyre. The Kleber Krisalp HP3 was another tyre that excelled in the snow, and it had great straight aquaplaning resistance, and while it was nowhere near as bad as the Petlas in the wet, it couldn't match the best on test, especially in the important wet braking test, meaning 8th overall is the best it could manage. The Michelin Alpin 6 finished a surprise 7th overall. As usual, it was a very good tyre in the dry with the shortest dry braking. However, its wet and snow performance didn't live up to the usual Michelin brand expectations, and it had one of the highest rolling resistance on test. A test to forget for the French manufacturer, especially after Michelin won my all-season test in the same size and the same conditions with the Cross Climate 2. And as other tests from across the industry are appearing, it's confirming this is the exception rather than the rule for the Alpin 6. You can check out the data on tyrereviews.com. 6th place overall went to the impressive Vredestein Wintrac Pro. This tyre was excellent in the dry, held its own in the wet with good subjective handling, and was a quiet tyre. Unfortunately, it wasn't the strongest tyre in the snow, with the slowest snow handling time and the worst traction. It struggled in the deeper water of the aquaplaning test and had the highest rolling resistance of all the tyres on test. Potentially an option for climates like the UK for people who really want to fit a winter tyre instead of an all-season tyre, but probably not a strong option anymore for climates that see a lot of snow. The Semperit Speed Grip 5 in 5th was essentially exactly as good as the Vredestein in the dry, not quite as good in the wet, but much better in the aquaplaning test, a little bit better in the snow, but it did have one of the best rolling resistances on the test. I'd like to see some more wet performance from this tyre to push it further towards the front of the results. The new Pirelli Cinturato Winter 2 was the most fun tyre to drive in all conditions. It was the winter tyre of the group that seemed to focus as much on lateral grip as it did on longitudinal grip, and while it wasn't the best in snow braking or the aquaplaning test, it was great in snow handling, wet handling and dry handling, and it was just a very likeable tyre. A deserved 4th overall and a tyre I recommend. The new Hankook Winter Cept RS3 continues Hankook's impressive run of results, and other than an outlier in snow braking, it is a winter tyre with no major weaknesses. It was impressive in the dry, very impressive in the wet, and thoroughly enjoyable around the snow handling track, with predictable handling and high levels of grip. A good aquaplaning result and high snow traction cements the tyre in 3rd place, and is a tyre I highly recommend. The Continental WinterContact TS870 might be one of the older new tyres in the test, but you can never count Continental out of a winter tyre test, and the TS870 had an exceptional run of results. It was the best tyre in the wet overall, being one of the few tyres which excelled both in the wet grip test and the deeper water test of aquaplaning. In the snow, it was better longitudinally than it was laterally, which helps in the overall results as braking is the highest weighted scoring in the snow, and it was good during dry handling, even if it did struggle a little bit in dry braking. Plus, it had a relatively low rolling resistance. A very impressive tyre, another one worthy of being highly recommended. And in 1st place, winning the test overall, we have the Bridgestone Blizzak LM005. As in other tests, this wasn't the best in dry braking and wasn't quite as balanced as some of the other tyres in snow handling, but they were the only weaknesses of the LM005. The LM005 excelled in the wet grip test with the best grip in wet handling and the shortest wet braking. It also won snow braking and performed well in snow traction, had some of the lowest noise on test and the lowest rolling resistance of the top tyres. A thoroughly deserved win for the Japanese giant. Congratulations to Bridgestone. That's the end of the test. Please hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know what your next set of tyres will be in the comments below. Go and review your tyres over at tyre-reviews.com, as it really does help this channel and I'd appreciate it. If you have any questions about this test, please do ask below, and as always, safe motoring.